That seat belongs to someone who actually deserves it." The words landed like a hand pressed flat against a chest, not a shout, not a question, but a verdict delivered with the quiet, absolute certainty of someone who had never once been told they were wrong. The fluorescent lights of JFK's Terminal 7 hummed overhead, indifferent and relentless, casting everything in that particular shade of white that made every face look slightly unwell, and every situation feel slightly more desperate than it actually was. The gate area for Transglobe Air Flight 112 to London Heathrow was the usual organized chaos of a Tuesday evening international departure, rolling luggage phone calls conducted at inconsiderate volumes, children who had long since exhausted their patience, and the particular brand of self-important stillness that gathered in the first-class boarding line like sediment. Doctor. Naomi Carter stood at the podium with her boarding pass extended, her posture the same as it had been for the last 20 seconds straight, unhurried, occupying exactly the space she was entitled to occupy, and not 1 inch more. In her left hand, secured by a grip that had become unconscious over years of travel, was the handle of a black Pelican case, its surface scuffed at the corners in the specific way that comes not from carelessness, but from 10,000 miles of careful, purposeful use. Her leather briefcase hung from her right shoulder. She wore a charcoal cashmere tracksuit that had cost more than most people's rent, and had been chosen not for its cost, but for the simple, hard-won wisdom that 8 hours over the Atlantic was not a runway show, and that a woman who might be called upon to save or condemn a $6 billion fleet of aircraft in the first hour after landing needed her body to be rested, not pinched. The woman across the podium from her, Diane Holloway, according to the name badge that caught the light when she moved, had not yet looked at the boarding pass. She was looking at Naomi. She had been looking at Naomi since Naomi stepped to the front of the line, and the look she was giving her was one that Naomi recognized the way you recognize weather, the way you recognize the particular drop in air pressure that comes before something breaks open. It was a look that performed a calculation and arrived at an answer before any evidence had been consulted. It was the look of a conclusion dressed up as a question. Diane Holloway was a woman in her late 50s with platinum blonde hair lacquered into a shape that did not move when she moved a Transglobe uniform worn with the stiff authority of someone who understood it as a rank rather than a role, and eyes the color of old ice flat assessing and carrying within them the practiced ease of someone who had been making judgments like this one for a very long time and had never once been made to answer for them. She had not taken the boarding pass. Her fingers had not moved toward it. She stood behind the podium with her hands resting on the edge of the desk, and she let the silence stretch out 1 beat longer than was professional, 2 beats longer than was accidental, and then she said it. That seat belongs to someone who actually deserves it. Naomi did not move. She did not lower the boarding pass. She did not look away. She had learned over a career that had taken her into rooms and terminals and boardrooms, where she was the only person who looked like her, that the moment you looked away was the moment the other person decided they had won something. She was not going to let Diane Holloway win something tonight. But to understand why this moment mattered not just to Naomi, but to the $6 billion sitting in a hangar at Heathrow, to the 40,000 employees of Transglobe Air, who were about to have their world rearranged by a woman in a cashmere tracksuit, you have to go back 18 hours to a lab in Pittsburgh at 2 in the morning, where the real story began. The Aerosystems Global Testing Facility outside Pittsburgh was the kind of building that announced its seriousness through absence rather than presence. No logo above the door, no decorative landscaping, no architectural flourish of any kind. It was a long, low structure of reinforced concrete and treated steel set back from the access road behind a perimeter fence that required 2 separate badge scans and a biometric confirmation to enter. Inside, the air was filtered to a precision that most hospitals would have envied, and the lighting was calibrated to eliminate shadow in a way that felt less like illumination and more like exposure. At 2:17 in the morning, the main testing bay was occupied by exactly 2 people, a junior analyst named Derek, who was monitoring the overnight data feeds and trying very hard not to fall asleep, and Dr. Naomi Carter, who had not slept in 31 hours and showed no particular signs of intending to rectify this in the near future. She was standing at the primary analysis console with her back to Derek, her eyes moving across a sequence of readouts with the focused, unhurried attention of someone listening to music only they could hear. The G88 turbine data was spread across 3 monitors: pressure variance graphs, acoustic signature logs, thermal distribution maps rendered in gradients of orange and blue, and Naomi was reading it the way a doctor reads a patient's face, not scanning for anomalies so much as taking the whole picture in and letting her understanding of it settle and clarify. She had been doing this for 22 years. She had started as the youngest engineer ever certified to conduct independent acoustic diagnostics on commercial jet engines at the age of 26, a fact that had been noted in exactly 1 trade publication and then quietly filed away by an industry that had not quite known what to do with her. Over the 2 decades since she had signed off on more fleet certifications than any other independent auditor in North America, had been called as an expert witness in 3 federal aviation safety hearings and had twice recommended against certification for aircraft that were subsequently found upon independent review to have exactly the structural vulnerabilities she had identified. Airlines did not argue with Naomi Carter's reports. They didn't have the standing to. The Pelican case sat on the workbench to her left, open, its contents arranged with a precision that was partly professional habit and partly personal necessity. The diagnostic tools inside the acoustic sensors, the calibration units, the portable data interfaces, had been configured specifically to the tolerances she worked within a process that had taken weeks, the first time she'd done it, and that she now maintained with the same regularity and exactitude that other people applied to their annual physicals. The case was black-tagged. Its contents cleared for transport only under her personal supervision, a condition she had insisted upon herself years ago after an incident in which improperly handled equipment had introduced a margin of error into a fuel efficiency analysis that had taken 3 weeks to trace and correct. She had never let it happen again. The case went where she went. That was the rule. At 6:14 in the morning, her phone rang. She picked it up without looking at the screen because at 6:14 in the morning, there was only one person who called her. "Tell me you're finishing up," said Robert Vance, whose voice at any hour carried the particular compressed energy of a man who maintained 17 simultaneous priorities and was currently anxious about at least 12 of them. Robert was the Executive Vice President of North American Operations for Transglobe Air, which meant he was the person responsible for ensuring that every aircraft in the carrier's fleet was where it was supposed to be doing what it was supposed to do without costing the company money it hadn't planned to spend. He had been Naomi's primary corporate liaison for 4 years, and their relationship had achieved the particular efficiency of 2 professionals who respected each other enough to skip the parts of conversation that didn't matter. "I'm finishing up," Naomi said. "The G88 certified. I'll have the written report completed on the flight." She could hear the relief in the exhale that followed even through the compression of a mobile connection. "Edmund is going to want to hear it directly from you before the board presentation. He's already in London. The session is at 2 o'clock his time. I'll be there at 9 if the flight is on time. Your seat is confirmed. 1A, same as Dallas and as Chicago before that. It's yours for the full tour, Naomi. I made that arrangement 3 weeks ago and it hasn't changed." He paused. "You have everything you need. I have everything I need." After she hung up, she stood for a moment in the blue-white quiet of the testing bay, her hand still resting on the phone. Derek had fallen asleep in his chair, his head tilted at an angle that would cause him to regret it in the morning. Outside, beyond the concrete walls and the filtered air and the perimeter fence, the world was beginning to consider the possibility of dawn. Naomi packed the Pelican case with the same 12-minute efficiency she brought to everything she did in airports and hotels and laboratories across the country. She packed without consulting a list because the list had long since been internalized. She packed the tracksuit she would wear on the flight, cashmere charcoal chosen years ago when she had made the conscious decision that comfort on a long-haul work flight was not a luxury, but a professional requirement, that a body that arrived rested, arrived capable, and that she had long since stopped needing to dress for other people's comfort with her presence. She looked at herself once in the mirror on the back of the locker room door. She had her mother's eyes and her father's jaw, and the particular quality of stillness in her expression that years of being the only person in the room who looked like her had either built or revealed she had never been entirely sure which. She picked up the Pelican case. She picked up her briefcase. She walked out into the beginning of the morning. Terminal 7 at JFK was familiar to Naomi in the way that a language you've spoken for decades becomes familiar. Not charming, not novel, but deeply known, readable at a glance in ways that required no conscious effort. She moved through it at 7:32 in the evening with the particular economy of someone who had learned exactly how much attention an airport required and had stopped giving it one drop more. She registered the delayed departure board at gate 19 before she saw the sign because she had already read it in the body language of the gate agent who was fielding questions with the careful smile of someone buying time. She clocked the security checkpoint back up near the international concourse entrance and adjusted her pace accordingly, threading through without breaking stride. She noted, as she always did, the sound of the aircraft on the tarmac, the low, even harmonics of engines at idle, the specific pitch of a pushback tug, and she cataloged them without thinking the way a musician hears chord progressions in background noise. The first-class boarding line for Flight 112 was already forming when she arrived at Gate 23, and she joined it with the same unremarkable efficiency with which she did everything in airports. In front of her, a heavy-set man in a rumpled suit jacket, who was conducting what appeared to be a deeply contentious business, call his voice carrying the specific pitch of someone who believed volume was a substitute for authority. He would later be identified in legal filings as Mr. George Bradford, senior partner at a Manhattan investment firm. Behind Naomi, a young couple who had the particular luminous exhaustion of people running on adrenaline and happiness, who whispered to each other in the shorthand of people who had recently made a decision that had changed everything. Naomi noticed Diane Holloway before Diane noticed her. She was standing at the boarding podium with the posture of someone who had spent 27 years deciding who was worthy of passage, and the way she stood. The particular set of her shoulders, the angle at which she held her head, as she scanned the line, communicated her understanding of her role, not as a service function, but as a gatekeeping one. Her eyes moved across the queue like a customs official's, and they were not warm eyes, not in the practiced warmth of hospitality way, not even in the ordinary human way. They were assessing eyes, the eyes of someone who had sorted people into categories for so long that the sorting had become involuntary. They moved past Mr. Bradford. They paused on the honeymooning couple for a moment, approving perhaps or simply registering them as non-threatening. And then they moved to Naomi, and they stopped. Naomi felt it. She always felt it the moment the calculation ran, the moment the conclusion arrived ahead of any evidence. It was a specific sensation, not pain exactly, more like the feeling of a room temperature dropping several degrees in the span of a breath. She had felt it in Atlanta in 2019, when a concierge at a 5-star hotel had asked if she was sure she had a reservation. She had felt it in Chicago in 2021 when a colleague had introduced her at a conference, and the man being introduced to had looked past her to ask who was presenting the engineering data. She had felt it in Dallas 3 months ago at this very airline's gate when a different agent had asked to see her credentials twice while processing the man in front of her without a second glance. Each time she had made a choice. She had let it pass. She had completed the transaction, boarded the aircraft, done her work, and filed the sensation away in the place where things like that went when you had decided that your work mattered more than your anger. She had told herself it was strategy. She had told herself that the work was the answer, that every report she signed, every fleet she certified, Every room she walked into and owned through sheer precision of thought was a better response than the one that felt satisfying in the short term. She still believed that. But standing in line at gate 23 watching Diane Holloway watch her, she felt the accumulated weight of every choice she had made to let it pass, and the weight was considerable. Diane processed Mr. Bradford with the brisk efficiency of someone who had long since learned exactly how much attention to give a man in a suit. She processed the honeymooning couple with genuine warmth, asking about their destination, sending them off with the kind of smile that suggested she was capable of it when she chose to deploy it. Then Naomi stepped forward, boarding pass extended. Diane's eyes dropped to the pass. Then they came back up to Naomi, a full, slow scan, the kind that takes in clothing and luggage and whatever story a person thinks they can read from those 2 data points. The cashmere tracksuit, the battered Pelican case, the carry-on bag that looked, if you were the kind of person who sorted people into categories at a glance, more like something belonging in economy than in the foremost seat of a transatlantic first-class cabin. Then Diane's eyes went back to the boarding pass, and she did not take it. "Just a moment," she said. She turned to the computer terminal and began typing. Her keystrokes had the deliberate quality of performance rather than inquiry, the movement of someone establishing a record, rather than genuinely consulting one. Naomi watched her hands and understood immediately what was happening. Understood it the way she understood a sensor reading that didn't match the expected range, with the calm clarity of a professional confronting a known problem. "Is there something wrong?" Naomi asked. Her voice was exactly what it always was, low-level, carrying the particular quality of someone who had learned to make a small sound travel a significant distance. Diane did not look up from the screen. "This seat," she said, and she said it with enough volume that the nearest segment of the economy boarding line could hear her clearly. "Seat 1A. This is our premier flagship seat. It's typically reserved for our priority executive travelers." "It is reserved," Naomi said. "By my company. I am Dr. Naomi Carter. My name is in the manifest under Aerosystems Global." Diane's mouth compressed into a thin, bloodless line that was technically a smile in the same way that a closed door is technically architecture. "I'm seeing a flag on this booking," she said. "A priority hold under R. Vance. Robert Vance is my corporate liaison at Transglobe," Naomi said, and she kept her voice even because she had been keeping her voice even in situations like this one for her entire professional life, and because the alternative, the satisfying, righteous, completely understandable alternative, would have given Diane exactly what she seemed to be looking for. "He arranged the booking on my behalf. I am the passenger of record. You can verify that by scanning the pass you are currently holding." Diane looked at the boarding pass in the way that a person looks at something they have already decided is not what it claims to be. Then she looked at Naomi again, and something behind her eyes settled into a kind of grim certainty. The certainty of someone who has made a decision and is no longer in the business of reconsidering it. "I'd like to verify that through our system," Diane said. "You'll need to step aside." "I will not step aside," Naomi said. "I am a ticketed first-class passenger at the front of the first-class boarding line, with a valid boarding pass, and I am asking you to scan it. That is the procedure. Please follow it. Kevin, the gate agent, 23 years old. A Transglobe employee for 14 months, possessed of the particular ethical clarity of someone who had not yet learned that looking the other way was an option, had been watching the exchange from his position at the secondary desk. He had already pulled up the Flight 112 manifest on his own terminal. He had already seen Dr. Naomi Carter's name clearly listed cross-referenced with Aerosystems Global and Seat 1A. He had already understood, with the sick lurch of someone watching something avoidable become inevitable, exactly what was happening and exactly what Diane was choosing to do. He looked at Diane. He looked at the screen. He did not speak yet because he did not have the seniority or the courage to speak yet, and because some part of him was still hoping that Diane would simply look at the pass, scan it, and stop. She did not stop. Diane Holloway turned back to her screen with the particular body language of someone who has decided that what they are doing is reasonable and that the unreasonableness is coming from the other direction. She typed something. She waited. She typed something else. The whole performance had the rhythm of bureaucratic due diligence and the substance of theater. "I'm not seeing a confirmation on my end that this booking is active," Diane said, and the flatness of the statement was remarkable, not apologetic, not genuinely confused, but declarative, delivered from a height. "It is active," Naomi said. "It has been active since it was booked 3 weeks ago. If your system is showing a discrepancy, the resolution is to scan the pass in your hand, which will confirm it." "I don't think that's going to be necessary," Diane said, which was such a strange thing to say in response to a request to complete the basic function of her role that Kevin, at his secondary desk, had to actively stop himself from looking up. "Scanning the boarding pass is the standard verification process," Naomi said. "It takes approximately 4 seconds. I'm asking you to do it." Diane set the boarding pass on the edge of the podium, not in Naomi's direction, not extended back toward her, but placed flat on the desk as though it were a piece of evidence at a hearing. She then addressed the gate area at a volume carefully calibrated to carry beyond the immediate conversation. "This seat 1A is flagged in our system as a priority executive reservation. It's typically issued at the senior executive level through our corporate partnership program. I need to confirm that the documentation matches the passenger." She glanced at Naomi's cashmere tracksuit. The glance brief and deliberate, like a period at the end of a sentence. "Do you have any additional documentation, corporate correspondence perhaps, or a company identification card?" Naomi was quiet for exactly 1 second. It was the second in which she measured the distance between what was happening and what was acceptable, and found it to be considerable. "I have a valid boarding pass, a passport, and my name in your manifest," she said. "I do not carry corporate correspondence to the airport gate. No other passenger in this line has been asked for additional documentation." "I can only speak to this passenger," Diane said, and somehow managed to make the word passenger sound like a category she was not entirely convinced applied here. "Then speak to me," Naomi said. "By scanning the pass, George Bradford, the man in the rumpled suit who had been processed without a single additional question 4 minutes earlier, had ended his phone call and was now watching the exchange with the uncomfortable attention of someone who wants to leave, but is also against his better judgment, unable to look away. He recognized something in the situation, had the particular guilty recognition of a man who has watched things like this happen before and has never done anything about them, and he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, and he said nothing, and he went to his seat. Kevin kept his eyes on his screen. He had now pulled up the call log for the booking. The reservation had been made on the corporate account of Aerosystems Global by one Robert Vance, EVP Operations Transglobe Air, 3 weeks and 2 days prior. Seat 1. A window full fare unrestricted. Passenger of record Dr. Naomi Carter. The booking was as clean and unambiguous as a booking could be. Kevin looked at Diane. He looked at the boarding pass sitting on the edge of the podium. He thought about saying something. He thought about what Diane's face would do if he said something. And then, to his lasting shame, he looked back at his screen. "I need you to hold for just a moment while I make a call to verify through our operations center," Diane said, and she reached for the phone behind the podium with the authority of someone executing a reasonable procedure. And Naomi understood with complete and total clarity that if she allowed Diane to make that call and generate any kind of secondary record of a disputed booking, the next step would be security, and after security, it would not matter what the manifest said because the narrative would have been established, and Naomi Carter was not going to allow a false narrative to be established with her standing there holding a valid boarding pass. "Scan it," Naomi said, and she extended the boarding pass again. "Now please, The flight is boarding." Diane looked at the extended hand. She looked at the boarding pass. And then she did something that the gate area CCTV would later capture in sufficiently high definition to be utterly unambiguous. Something that Kevin would describe in his witness statement with the careful understatement of someone who had seen exactly what happened and was not prepared to minimize it. She reached out and she took the boarding pass, not from Naomi's outstretched hand in the normal, functional way that gate agents take documents from passengers, but snatched it, fingers closing around the cardstock and pulling it with a quick, deliberate motion that conveyed something much closer to confiscation than processing. The sound was small, a brief whisper of cardstock against skin, a noise no louder than turning a page. But in the gate area where the ambient volume of an international terminal had contracted into the particular focused silence of a public moment, it was heard by everyone standing within 15 feet, and it landed with the weight of something much larger than its physical dimensions. "I'll be verifying this," Diane said, holding the boarding pass between two fingers at a slight distance from her body, in the specific way that someone holds something they believe to be contaminated. "You'll need to step to the side. Return my boarding pass." Naomi's voice did not rise. It descended, dropping into a register that carried not anger, but a very specific, very measured authority, the voice of someone accustomed to being in rooms where the stakes were high and the margin for error was zero. "You have taken my travel document. Return it immediately. Ma'am." Diane's chin came up. The ma'am was deployed like a tool blunt and deliberately diminishing the kind of ma'am designed to reframe the speaker as hysterical and the receiver as reasonable. "I am following our verification protocol for a flagged booking." "There is no flagged booking," Naomi said. "There is a valid reservation, a valid boarding pass, and a gate agent who is currently in possession of my property without authorization. I have asked you twice to scan that pass. I am asking you a third time. Kevin." Diane turned her head toward the secondary desk. "Kevin, please call Port Authority Security to Gate 23. We have a passenger causing a disturbance." And then before Kevin could respond, before Naomi could speak, before the couple behind Naomi could finish exchanging the horrified glance they had been exchanging since the moment of the snatch, Diane pointed to the row of hard plastic seats against the far wall. "You can wait over there. We'll see what we can do about getting you on a later flight." "Economy." She said the last word with a brief contained satisfaction and then turned her body away from Naomi entirely toward the business class boarding line and raised her voice to the charming, practiced register of hospitality. "So sorry for the brief delay, ladies and gentlemen. We'll resume boarding momentarily. Thank you so much for your patience." The gate area was so quiet that the sound of a departing aircraft 2 gates over seemed closer than it was. Naomi did not move to the plastic chairs. She stood where she was, in the center of the gate area, with her briefcase over one shoulder and the pelican case in her hand, and she was entirely still in the way that very large things are still not passively, but with an enormous gathered internal weight. The woman, 3 people back in the economy line, was holding her phone up, not conspicuously, at an angle that was trying to look like nothing in particular. A man in a navy blazer near the window had gone very carefully still in the way of a person who is trying not to be noticed while watching everything. Kevin at the secondary desk had typed something, deleted it, and typed it again. And Naomi stood in the eye of all of it, and she let the moment exist exactly as it was. And she breathed in once, very slowly, and she thought about the pelican case in her hand and what it contained, and what would happen to Transglobe Air's $6 billion fleet certification if the woman carrying it did not get on that plane. And then she stepped to the side, not to the plastic chairs, but to a concrete support pillar 12 feet from the podium, and she set the pelican case down at her feet, and she reached into her briefcase, and she took out her phone. Naomi had been keeping her voice even for a very long time. Tonight she was done keeping it even for free. From the pillar, Naomi could see the gate area in its entirety, and the gate area in turn was watching her with the fractured, sidelong attention of a crowd that has witnessed something it is not sure how to categorize. There were perhaps 40 people in the immediate boarding zone, 15 in the first class and business line that was slowly resuming its forward movement under Diane's carefully cheerful supervision, and 25 or so scattered in the general seating who had been watching the exchange unfold with the alert, slightly guilty attention of people who are observing an injustice and have not yet decided whether to intervene. The woman with the phone had not lowered it. A teenage boy near the charging station was watching with his mouth slightly open. 2 airport employees in trans-globe vests, ground crew not gate staff, had slowed their passage through the area to observe one of them leaning toward the other to say something quiet. Diane, for her part, had resumed the performance of normalcy with impressive speed. She was processing the business class line with the warmth and efficiency that she had withheld from Naomi, and there was something almost theatrical about the transition, the way she had snapped from confrontation to hospitality in the span of a turned back, as if the previous 8 minutes had been a separate sealed event. Standing at the pillar, Naomi assessed the situation with the same methodical precision she would have brought to an anomalous engine reading identifying the components, their relationships, the failure points, the vectors of consequence. The Pelican case. This was the fact around which everything else organized itself, the fact that Diane had not known and had not thought to ask about, because Diane had reached her conclusions before gathering any evidence and was no longer in the business of updating them. The equipment in that case was black-tagged. It was cleared for transport in Naomi's personal custody only. If she was not on Flight 112, the case was not on Flight 112. If the case was not on Flight 112, the final diagnostic verification for the G88 engine, the verification that would unlock Sir Edmund Hale's fleet certification and the $6 billion attached to it, could not be completed in London at 2 o'clock the following afternoon. The contract language around that certification contained penalty clauses that Robert Vance had never needed to think about, because Naomi Carter had never missed a deadline in 22 years of auditing. She thought about that, and she thought about something else, something heavier and less quantifiable but no less real. She thought about what would have happened if she had been a different kind of professional, a black woman with the same legitimate boarding pass and the same valid reservation, but without a direct line to the EVP of operations, without the specific leverage of the equipment in her hand, without the professional history that made her impossible to quietly dismiss. She thought about that woman standing at this pillar, having had her boarding pass snatched, having been publicly accused of fraud, having been pointed toward the plastic chairs by a gate agent who had already decided who she was and wasn't going to be moved by evidence. She thought about what that woman would do and what would happen to her. And the thought was not anger exactly. It was something larger and more structural than anger, something that had been building for 20 years and had arrived tonight at a very specific conclusion. She was going to make the call she needed to make. She was going to get on that plane. And then she was going to make sure that what had just happened at Gate 23 of Terminal 7 was the last time it happened the way it had happened to her or to anyone who came after her. The Port Authority officers arrived at the gate looking somewhat uncertain which was accurate because Kevin had, in a small act of moral clarity that would later be noted in his witness statement, called security in the most neutral terms possible, reporting only that there is a situation at Gate 23 that may require clarification rather than the fraudulent passenger causing a disturbance that Diane had asked him to report. The officers looked at Naomi standing quietly at the pillar with her luggage. They looked at Diane, who was gesturing toward Naomi with the confident authority of someone summoning backup. They looked back at Naomi, who met their eyes directly and said in the level, clear voice of someone who has been in exactly this position before, "Good evening. I am a ticketed first-class passenger whose boarding pass has been confiscated by the gate agent without authorization. I have not caused any disturbance. I am waiting for this situation to be resolved so that I can board my flight." The officers exchanged a look. One of them turned to Diane. "Ma'am, can you walk us through what's happening here?" And Diane, emboldened by the uniform, by the badge, by the 27 years of authority that she had never once been made to defend, with actual evidence, leaned forward and said the thing that completed her destruction. This individual approached the first-class boarding line with what appears to be either a purchased or a found boarding pass for our premier flagship seat. She has been unable to provide documentation to support the booking, and she has been aggressive and disruptive when I attempted to follow verification protocol. Naomi listened to this. She noted the specific language. She noted the witnesses within earshot. She noted Diane's name on the badge, which she had already memorized, and the flight number displayed on the podium and the time on her phone. Then she looked at the officers and said, "The pass is valid. My name is in the manifest. I have not been aggressive. I have asked 4 times for the gate agent to scan my pass using the standard verification tool that is sitting on the podium 6 feet from where she is standing. She has refused each time." One of the officers looked at the scanner on the podium. He looked at Diane. "Why hasn't the pass been scanned?" he asked. The question hung in the air of Gate 23 for a long moment, because it was in its simplicity the only question that had ever mattered, and no one had asked it until now. Diane's answer to the officer's question was not an answer at all. It was a pivot, smooth and practiced, the kind of rhetorical maneuver that comes naturally to someone who has spent decades in situations where authority is performance, and performance is authority. "Our system flagged the booking," she said. "I'm following protocol by seeking additional verification before allowing boarding." "The protocol for additional verification," Naomi said, addressing not Diane, but the officer with the flat precision of someone reading from a document, "is to scan the boarding pass using the gate scanner, which generates an immediate system confirmation or denial. It is not to confiscate the document, make visual assessments of the passenger's appearance, or call for security before the standard verification tool has been used." The officer looked at Diane again. Diane's jaw had tightened to the consistency of something that might crack. "I have discretion," she said. "Senior flight staff have discretion in matters of Diane." The name came from behind them, and it was said with the quiet force of something arriving at terminal velocity. Everyone turned. Naomi turned last. She turned slowly because she had heard something in the voice, not anger, but the particular tone of someone who has just understood the full scope of a catastrophe they are responsible for containing. Gloria Marsh was the Terminal 7 station manager for Transglobe Air, a woman of 51 who had built her career on being the person in the room who was calm when no one else was, and who was currently demonstrating that this skill, like all skills, had its absolute limits. She was walking toward the gate podium from the direction of the main concourse, and the color of her face was the kind that happens when blood goes somewhere other than where it is usually kept, and in her hand was a radio that she appeared to have forgotten she was holding. She had run most of the way from the operations hub at the center of the terminal, which she would not normally do, and the fact that she had done it anyway told Naomi everything she needed to know about the phone call that had preceded it. "Diane," Gloria said again, arriving at the podium and positioning herself between Diane and the gate area with the body language of a person installing a firewall. She glanced at Naomi once, a look that contained in its approximately 1 second of duration recognition horror and the specific quality of apology that precedes words. And then she turned entirely to Diane and lowered her voice to something that was technically not audible to the broader gate area, and practically was. "I need to speak with you. Now, off the podium." "I'm processing the line," Diane said, and the confidence in her voice had acquired for the first time a slightly hollow quality. "You are finished processing the line," Gloria said. She held out her hand, palm up. "The boarding pass. Give it to me." Something moved behind Diane's eyes. It was the first thing that had moved there in the last 15 minutes, the first indication that some signal from the outside world had gotten through the conviction she had been operating inside of since she had first laid eyes on Naomi Carter in the boarding line. Her hand went to her uniform pocket almost involuntarily, and she withdrew the boarding pass with the stiff, jerky motion of someone whose body has understood what their mind has not yet fully processed. She put it in Gloria's hand. And standing at the pillar, watching Diane Holloway's platinum-lacquered certainty begin at last to develop cracks around its edges, Naomi Carter did not feel what she had perhaps expected to feel. She did not feel vindicated or satisfied or even particularly relieved. What she felt was tired, the specific long-accumulated tiredness of a woman who had been right about something consistently and without acknowledgement for a very long time, and who had learned that being proven right was its own kind of exhaustion. She picked up the Pelican case. She waited. She watched Diane Holloway look at Gloria Marsh's face and understand for the first time that the ground beneath her had changed. Naomi had made the call 4 minutes before Gloria arrived. She had stepped to the pillar, set down the Pelican case, and navigated her contacts with the unhurried efficiency of someone executing a plan that had been available to her the entire time, and that she had chosen not to execute until the moment the choice became necessary. She did not scroll. She did not search. She pressed the name and listened to it ring. Robert Vance picked up after 2 rings. In the background, she could hear the specific acoustic profile of an operations center, multiple conversations at moderate volume, the soft percussion of keyboard activity, the particular ambient hum of a room full of people managing things that matter. Naomi. His voice had the alert, slightly strained quality of someone who has been managing a long evening and is braced for the thing that will extend it further. "Tell me you're at the gate." "I am at the gate," she said. "I am not on the aircraft." A pause, short but complete. "What's happened?" She told him. She told him the way she wrote her reports factually, sequentially, without editorializing each element placed in its correct position relative to the others. Gate 23. The boarding line. Diane Holloway. The refusal to scan. The confiscation. The allegation of forgery. The call to security. The plastic chairs. She told him all of it in approximately 90 seconds. Her voice leveled her eyes on the podium where Diane was watching Kevin watch her. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a man recalibrating. She could hear him breathing. Then she heard the sound of a chair moving quick and deliberate, and the quality of his voice when he spoke again had changed completely. "She took your boarding pass." "Yes. The 1A pass. The one I booked on the corporate account." "Yes." "And she called security." "She did." Jesus. The word came out compressed and quiet through what sounded like clenched teeth. She could hear him typing. "Naomi, I stay where you are. Do not move. I am calling the station manager right now, and I am calling operations, and I need you to understand that this is being fixed in the next 3 minutes. He stopped. She could hear him thinking the particular quality of silence that precedes someone landing on the most important thing. "The case," he said. "The Pelican case. Is it with you? It is at my feet." He absorbed this. They both understood what it meant, not as a threat, not as leverage, but as a plain operational fact that reframed everything that had happened at Gate 23 from a customer service incident into something that had a direct and measurable impact on Transglobe Air's ability to complete a transaction worth $6 billion. "Don't say that to anyone else," he said. "I'll say it for you. Robert." She let a beat pass. "I want you to understand something. If I were not the person who had booked the equipment in that case, if I were a doctor or a lawyer or any other black woman with a valid boarding pass and no direct line to your office, I would currently be sitting in a plastic chair waiting for a later flight in economy. That is the situation I need you to also be addressing, along with the other one. Another silence. This one carried a different quality. Not the silence of a man managing a crisis, but the silence of a man hearing something clearly that he had perhaps been hearing imprecisely for some time. "I hear you," he said, "and then I'll fix all of it." She disconnected the call. She set the phone in her pocket. She stood at the pillar and she waited, and behind her eyes she was composing already the structure of what she would write on the flight. The operations line at Gate 23 was a dedicated landline that ran directly from the Transglobe Air Central Operations Hub to the gate desk, bypassing the general customer service system entirely. It was used for weather holds, security escalations, aircraft mechanical flags, and rarely but with memorable consequences. When it happened, situations that had been elevated to the level of senior management intervention. In 14 months at the gate desk, Kevin had seen it ring exactly once during a diplomatic incident involving a misrouted cargo manifest and a very unhappy government attaché. When it began ringing now, he identified it by its specific tone, a double pulse lower than the customer line, and the sound of it made something in his chest perform an involuntary maneuver. He picked it up. "Gate 23. This is... Put me through to your station manager," said the voice on the other end, and it was not a request formulated in the syntax of requests. "This is Robert Vance, EVP North American Operations, right now." Kevin looked at Diane, who was watching him from the podium with the proprietary attention of a senior employee monitoring a junior one. He looked at his screen. He looked at the manifest, where Dr. Naomi Carter's name was still sitting in clean, clear text above the Aero Systems global corporate account number exactly as it had been for 3 weeks. "One moment, sir," he said, and he radioed Gloria Marsh. Gloria was 40 meters down the concourse reviewing a delayed departure report with 2 of her ground coordinators when her radio activated. She registered the gate number, registered the phrase, "Operations Line," and excused herself from the conversation without completing the sentence she had been in the middle of. By the time she had covered the first 20 meters, she was moving quickly. By the time she reached the gate desk, she was effectively running, which she would later describe in her incident report with the more professional phrase, "proceeding rapidly." She took the phone. She identified herself. She listened. The call lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds according to the phone log that would later be submitted as part of the investigation. During those 4 minutes and 11 seconds, Gloria's face moved through a series of expressions that Kevin, watching from the secondary desk, would describe to the union investigator as like watching someone realize the building they're standing in is on fire. The professional composure she had maintained for 21 years as a station manager did not collapse. It didn't collapse so much as it simply became inadequate to the information it was being asked to contain. She said at various points, "Yes, sir. And I understand." And she's what, at which point her eyes went to Kevin, who saw in her look not anger, but the specific expression of someone counting the number of times they had made a decision they could not now defend. Because Gloria Marsh had known about Diane Holloway. Not in the abstract way that a manager knows about problem employees in theory, in the specific documented actionable way of a manager who had received over the previous 5 years a total of 6 formal complaints from passengers who alleged that they had been singled out, delayed, questioned without cause, and redirected from premium cabins by the same senior flight attendant. 6 complaints. Gloria had reviewed each one. She had spoken to Diane twice formally, once in 2020 and once in 2022. She had accepted Diane's explanation each time that the passengers had been confused, that there were legitimate booking issues, that 27 years of service didn't happen without learning to read a situation, and she had filed the complaints in the closed category and moved on. She had moved on because Diane had seniority, because the union would make a fight of any formal disciplinary action, because none of the complaints had escalated to the level of corporate attention and in the arithmetic of station management. Things that didn't reach corporate attention were functionally things that could be managed locally, which was a gentler way of saying things that could be set aside. She had set them aside 5 times. And the 6th time was Dr. Naomi Carter's boarding pass in Diane's uniform pocket. She set the phone down. She looked at Kevin. "Where is she?" she asked, and Kevin pointed to the pillar, and Gloria looked at the woman standing there with a pelican case at her feet and a phone in her pocket, and the patient exhausted stillness of someone who has been here before, and Gloria Marsh understood in a complete and irreversible way what she had allowed to happen. She smoothed her jacket. She looked at Diane, who had registered the tone of the phone call from across the gate area, and was now watching Gloria with the first genuine uncertainty she had displayed all evening. Gloria walked to the podium. She stood in front of Diane, and she pitched her voice low, not because she was protecting Diane, but because this was still a public gate area, and she was still a station manager, and there were standards of conduct she intended to maintain even now on the worst night of her professional career. "Diane," she said, "I need the boarding pass." "I already explained the situation." "The boarding pass," Gloria said. Now, the hand went to the pocket. The pass came out. Diane's eyes were moving, searching Gloria's face for something, for the familiar signal that this would be handled, that seniority would count, that 27 years meant something in the final calculation. She did not find it. "The Port Authority officers you requested are going to escort you to my office," Gloria said. "You are suspended from duty effective immediately pending a full investigation." Diane blinked. The word suspended seemed to arrive with a slight delay, as if traveling through something thick. "The flight I'm the purser on this, Antoine, will assume purser responsibilities," Gloria said. "You will not be on this flight. You will not be on any transglobe flight until this process is complete, which, based on what I have been told in the last 4 minutes, I believe will conclude with your termination." She stopped. She let that land. "I am deeply sorry that it has taken this long for this to be said to you." She turned, walked 12 feet to the primary desk, picked up the boarding pass, and began walking toward the pillar and the woman standing at it. The walk from the gate desk to the pillar was not long in physical terms. 12 feet, perhaps 15, through a gate area that had gone collectively and completely silent in the way of a room that has understood it is witnessing something it will be describing to other people for years. But Gloria Marsh made it in the specific manner of someone counting each step, aware that what she was about to do would not be enough, could not be enough, and needed to be done anyway. Naomi watched her come. She did not adjust her posture. She did not change her expression. She had been waiting at this pillar for 11 minutes, and the waiting had not been passive. She had been composing, cataloging, organizing her understanding of every element of what had taken place into the precise, evidence-based structure that would, in a few hours, be the most consequential document she had ever written that did not involve engine certification. Gloria stopped in front of her. The station manager's face held the complicated expression of someone who has understood that apology, while necessary, is not the same as remedy, and who is trying to offer both simultaneously without confusing them. "Dr. Carter," she said, and her voice was steady in the way that takes effort. "I cannot adequately express how deeply and how personally I apologize for what you have experienced at this gate tonight. On behalf of Transglobe Air, on behalf of this terminal, and on behalf of my own failure to address the pattern of behavior that led to this moment." She paused on that last phrase, not dramatically, but because it deserved the pause, because she was not going to soften it or qualify it away. "This is your boarding pass." She held it out. Naomi took it. She looked at it. Then she looked at Diane, who was standing between the 2 Port Authority officers near the gate podium, with her hands at her sides, and the expression of someone whose interior architecture has begun to shift in ways they do not yet fully understand. Then Naomi looked back at Gloria. A failure to address a pattern, Naomi said. Her voice was quiet. The gate area was quiet enough that it carried. How long has the pattern existed? Gloria did not look away. Long enough that this should not have been possible tonight, she said. That is the honest answer. Naomi nodded once slowly, the way she nodded when a data point confirmed something she had already suspected. I want a full written incident report, she said, delivered to my email address and copied to Robert Vance and Sir Edmund Hale before this aircraft lands in London. I want a complete timeline of this evening's events, a copy of the security call log copies of any passenger complaints related to this employee from the past 5 years, and a statement of the corrective actions Transglobe intends to take. She held Gloria's gaze. Not suggestions. Actions. You will have all of it, Gloria said. The complaint history, Naomi said. I need that specifically, not because I want names, because I need to understand how many times someone tried to tell you about this and was not heard. The question landed the way a true thing lands when there is nowhere to deflect it. Gloria's jaw tightened briefly. You will have it, she said again, and this time the words were quieter, and they carried the weight of a woman who already knew what that document was going to show. Naomi picked up the Pelican case. She adjusted the strap of her briefcase. She looked once more toward the podium, not at Diane exactly, but in Diane's direction, a look that functioned less as acknowledgement and more as the closing of a record. And then she turned toward the jet bridge. I'd like to board my flight now, she said. Of course. Gloria moved ahead of her scanner in hand and processed the boarding pass with the reverent efficiency of someone making up for lost time. The scanner beeped. The green light illuminated. Dr. Naomi Carter walked through the boarding gate and into the jet bridge, her Pelican case in her hand, her briefcase over her shoulder, her footsteps even and unhurried. Behind her, the gate area exhaled. Kevin at the secondary desk opened a new incident report form on his computer. He began typing. He typed everything, the timeline, the exchanges, the specific language Diane had used, the moment of the snatch. His own failure to speak sooner, all of it with the careful, thorough honesty of someone who understands that the most useful thing he can do now is make sure the record is complete. He typed for 40 minutes. It was the most important document he had ever created, and he made sure every word of it was true. The aircraft door was held by Antoine Ferris, acting purser, a man of 43, who had been with Transglobe for 16 years, and who carried himself with the particular quality of someone who took professional dignity seriously, not as performance, but as principle. He had been briefed on the situation at the gate via a 2-minute radio call from Gloria Marsh as the crew was completing pre-departure checks, and what he had been told had produced in him a focused, purposeful calm. The calm of a person who has understood that the appropriate response to a colleague's catastrophic failure is to make the next thing go exactly right. Dr. Carter, he said as Naomi came through the door. He did not oversmile. He did not adopt the slightly frantic warmth of someone overcompensating. He simply looked at her with the direct professional attention of someone glad to see her and meaning it. Welcome aboard. We're pleased to have you with us this evening. He glanced at the Pelican case. May I stow that for you? I'll secure it personally in the forward compartment. Please, Naomi said and handed it to him, which she did not do lightly and which Antoine received with the understanding appropriate to that fact. She moved into the first-class cabin. The space had the hushed, padded quality of a very expensive library, 6 suites arranged in a configuration that gave each passenger the effective privacy of a small room separated by curved partitions of cream upholstery and pale wood. 5 of the 6 were occupied. George Bradford was in 2B, his jacket folded on the partition beside him, his face arranged in the determined non-expression of a man who absolutely was not watching Naomi walk to her seat. She settled into 1A. The seat was exactly what it had been booked as wide, quiet, positioned at the window with a view of the tarmac and the terminal lights beyond it, the geometry of a major airport seen from close range, all service vehicles and wing lights, and the distant shuttling of ground crew who did not know and would not know that anything had happened at Gate 23 tonight. Naomi set her briefcase in the storage compartment beside the seat. She sat down. She placed both hands flat on the small table surface in front of her, and she closed her eyes. 10 seconds. She allowed herself exactly 10 seconds of not performing anything, not composure, not professionalism, not the smooth, unruffled presentation she had maintained from the moment Diane Holloway had looked at her in the boarding line to the moment she had walked down this jet bridge. She allowed herself 10 seconds of simply being a person who had spent 35 hours without sleep, who had been publicly humiliated in a busy terminal, who was now sitting in the seat she had always been entitled to sit in, and who was very, very tired. Then she opened her eyes. She straightened slightly. She looked out the window at the service lights on the tarmac. Antoine appeared at her suite with the silent attentiveness of someone who has understood from context that this passenger does not need to be managed, only served. Sparkling water, he offered. "Please," she said. "And coffee black immediately after takeoff." "And Antoine?" She looked at him directly. "I'll be working for the first 4 hours. I don't need anything beyond that." "Understood," he said simply, and he meant it, and he left. The engines began their pre-departure sequence. Naomi could hear it, not just hear it, but read it the way she read everything mechanical, the turbines cycling up through their frequencies, the sound pressure patterns that told her whether something was running clean. The G-88S, she noted with a professional satisfaction that had nothing to do with the evening's events, sounded exactly as they should. They sounded like something that worked. She reached into her briefcase and took out her laptop. She opened 2 files simultaneously. The first was labeled G88, Turbine Series Final Certification Report, TGA Fleet, and it was 43 pages of analysis data tables, acoustic signature logs, and thermal variance graphs that represented 3 weeks of the most rigorous diagnostic work she had done in a decade. The second was a blank document. She named it Trans-Globe Air Terminal 7, JFK, Personnel and Liability Addendum, and she set it to the side of her screen and she began with the technical report. This was the order of things always. The work first. Not because the other thing was less important, she already knew at some level she trusted completely that the other thing might be more consequential in the long run, but because the work was what she had been sent to do, and because the discipline of completing it before anything else was the discipline that had made her who she was. The G88 engine data was, as she had told Robert at 6:14 that morning, definitive. 3 weeks of testing across 4 aircraft, 400 hours of acoustic monitoring thermal imaging at 27 separate test points, stress cycle analysis under conditions that replicated 12 years of operational wear in 6 days, all of it telling the same clear story, a story without ambiguity or exception. She moved through the final sections of the report with the focused efficiency of someone for whom this kind of work was not effort, but home. A place where everything made sense because everything was measurable, where conclusions followed from evidence, where there was no room for the kind of judgment that Diane Holloway had exercised at Gate 23, the judgment of eyes instead of instruments. The G88 engine, she wrote, meets, and in several critical areas exceeds all applicable ASD and International Aviation Safety Standards. The acoustic profile demonstrates a 34% reduction in noise emission compared to the previous generation, while thermal efficiency under sustained load conditions shows a 12% improvement. Stress cycle analysis indicates structural integrity consistent with a minimum operational lifespan of 22 years under standard maintenance protocols. Full fleet certification is recommended without reservation. She read the conclusion once. She read it again. She considered it for a moment with the same critical attention she would have applied to a conclusion she was uncertain about, because she never released a conclusion she was certain about without also asking herself whether she might be wrong, and in this case, she was not wrong and she saved the file. Then she slid the technical report to the left side of her screen. She moved the blank document to the center, and she began to write the thing that was in a different way equally important. She wrote the addendum with the same voice she used for the technical report, because the discipline was the same and the stakes were the same and the approach was the same. Facts, sequence, evidence, implication, recommendation, and because she had long ago understood that the things that happened to her in airports and boardrooms and gate areas were not personal complaints, they were data points, and data points required the same rigorous treatment as pressure variance readings and acoustic signature logs. She wrote the timeline first. Gate 23, Terminal 7, JFK, Flight 112, Transglobe Air. Tuesday evening. She named Diane Holloway, gave her employee designation as it appeared on the name badge, and described each action in sequence: the refusal to scan the visual assessment and its evident connection to her clothing and appearance, the confiscation of the boarding pass, the public characterization of the booking as fraudulent, the instruction to wait in the economy seating area, the call to Port Authority security on false premises. She quoted Diane verbatim where she had the words exactly, and paraphrased precisely where she had the meaning but not the wording, and she noted the distinction. Then she wrote the section she had been composing in some form or another for 20 years. She wrote, "The question this incident requires Transglobe Air to ask is not whether Diane Holloway's individual actions were appropriate. They were not, and this is not in dispute. The question is how an employee operating in this way was able to continue doing so in a customer-facing role for a period of time sufficient to generate a documented complaint history without the kind of intervention that would have prevented this evening's events." She wrote, "I was able to make a phone call to the EVP of operations. That phone call changed the outcome. The question of what the outcome would have been if I had not had that phone call, if I had been, as I am in every other measurable respect, a black woman with a valid boarding pass and no extraordinary leverage, is not a hypothetical. It is a risk assessment. The answer to that question describes a liability that is not limited to this incident." She paused at that point. Outside the window there was nothing but dark ocean and the faint reflection of the cabin light in the glass. Somewhere 40 rows back, the aircraft was full of people sleeping or watching films or talking quietly in the particular intimacy of shared nighttime travel. 40,000 feet below the Atlantic moved in patterns no satellite image could fully capture. She thought about a lab in Texas and a man behind a desk asking a 24-year-old whether she had the right room, and the smile she had produced in response, practiced and swift and already in that moment costing her something she could not have named. She thought about all the times she had not made the phone call, all the times the phone call had not been available to make. She thought about every woman who had sat in the plastic chairs. Then she wrote, "The pattern that enabled Diane Holloway to operate without accountability is not the product of one employee's individual character. It is built into the way this organization has chosen, through action and inaction alike, to handle reports of bias in its customer-facing operations. 6 complaints in 5 years involving the same employee, reviewed and closed by the same station management without escalation, represent not an oversight but a choice. Understanding why that choice was made repeatedly and by whom is the beginning of changing it." She wrote her recommendations. Not Diane's termination that was already in motion and required nothing from her. She wrote about the third-party audit she wanted the Meridian Group, whose work in bias assessment within logistics and transport organizations was the most rigorous she had encountered. She wrote about the complaint history review, 10 years cross-referenced by employee, by route, by passenger demographic. She wrote about the mandatory training she expected for every Transglobe Air employee with a customer-facing role from gate agents to senior cabin crew, and about what that training needed to contain. She attached the technical report and the addendum together in a single email. She addressed it to Robert Vance, Sir Edmund Hale, and Transglobe Air's head of legal operations. The subject line read, G88, Fleet Certification Final Report and Personnel Liability Addendum Action Required. She pressed send. Then she closed the laptop. She reclined the seat. She looked at the ceiling of the suite for approximately 30 seconds, and then she closed her eyes, and within minutes, because she was a person who had learned out of professional necessity to sleep when sleep was available, she was asleep. The engines outside her window continued their clean, even song. In the windowless operations office behind the Gate 23 desk, Diane Holloway sat in a chair that was not comfortable and had not been designed to be, and she waited for Gloria Marsh to finish reviewing the CCTV footage, and the experience of waiting was unlike anything she had experienced in 27 years of employment, because for 27 years she had always been in any given room, the one with the authority. The authority was not in the room right now. She had tried in the first few minutes after Gloria had closed the office door behind them to reconstruct the events in terms that made sense from inside her own understanding of how the world was organized. She had tried the word protocol, which had always been useful before. She had tried judgment call, which had served her well in previous difficult conversations with management. She had tried 27 years of experience, which she had found over a career to be a phrase that closed arguments before they fully opened. None of them worked. Gloria was watching the CCTV playback on the desk monitor. The gate podium, the boarding line, the sequence of events in unambiguous high definition, and her face had the quality of someone who has stopped looking for an alternative explanation and arrived at the only one available. "Watch this part," Gloria said, and rewound the footage by 8 seconds, and they both watched Diane's hand close around Naomi's boarding pass and pull it away. Diane said nothing. "I'm going to read you something," Gloria said. She pulled up a document on the secondary screen, a complaint form formatted with the Transglobe Standard header dated 3 years prior. She read the relevant section aloud. The language was different, but the shape of it was identical to what had happened tonight. A premium cabin passenger singled out at the gate, questioned without cause, handled with a quality of scrutiny applied to no other passenger in the same line. Diane Holloway, employee number listed. Complaint reviewed and closed. Gloria Marsh, station manager. She pulled up another one. And another. Diane sat in the chair and watched 5 years of choices she had thought were invisible become visible one document at a time. The union she started. "Has been notified," Gloria said. Their response was that gross misconduct is outside the scope of standard representation. They said it in writing, which is somewhat unusual, but I think they've looked at the footage. The word termination, when it arrived, did not arrive as a surprise exactly. It arrived as the confirmation of something Diane's body had understood before her mind was willing to. She felt it in her chest, settling a heavy finality, like something being put down that she had been carrying for longer than she realized. The Port Authority officers came to the door. One of them asked for her credentials. She unpinned the badge from her uniform. She removed the lanyard. She set them on the desk, and in the placing of them she felt the specific weight of 27 years becoming past tense. As the officers walked her through the terminal toward the exit, she passed the windows that looked out onto the tarmac, and she saw Transglobe Flight 112 pushing back from the gate, the aircraft moving with the slow, deliberate certainty of something very large beginning to go somewhere. The engines cycling up to departure power produced the deep harmonic pressure that Diane had felt through terminal windows 1,000 times over 27 years. And had never once stopped to appreciate. She stopped now briefly and watched the aircraft until it turned toward the runway and its lights were indistinguishable from the rest of the field. Then she kept walking. London Heathrow in the early morning had a quality of restrained, deliberate beginning. The fog not quite gone yet, the light not quite arrived, the airport operating in the efficient half-dark of 5:47 a.m. with the contained urgency of a machine that runs continuously and pauses for nothing, not weather, not hour, not the accumulated exhaustion of the humans who move through it. Transglobe. Flight 112 came in from the west, with the clean, even approach of an aircraft whose systems were functioning exactly as designed, touching down with the kind of landing that passengers don't remember, because it requires nothing from them. A long, smooth deceleration. The runway lights passing in a familiar blur. The engines winding back to the idle that Naomi, waking from 3 hours of genuine sleep, registered before she registered anything else. She sat up. She was oriented immediately, as she always was, aircraft Heathrow, morning London. She ran a hand over her face, took a breath, and reached for her briefcase. Antoine appeared at the suite entrance within 30 seconds of the aircraft stopping, which was impressively timed and not, she suspected, accidental. "We're at the gate in approximately 3 minutes. Dr. Carter," he said quietly. "I have your case from the forward compartment. You'll be first to disembark." He held the Pelican case, and he held it with both hands, and the care with which he did it was a small, wordless acknowledgement of everything he had understood about this evening without having been told most of it. "Thank you, Antoine," she said. "Your crew's service tonight was excellent." The relief in his face was genuine. "It was our privilege, Doctor," he said, and meant it in a way that was different from the standard deployment of the phrase. The jet bridge connected. She walked out. She was not met by an empty corridor. Sir Edmund Hale was 63 years old, white-haired and British in the specific mode of someone who had been educated to understand that comportment was not optional and that certain situations required you to be present for them personally regardless of what else was happening in your schedule. He had flown from London the previous evening on a separate flight. He was standing at the end of the jet bridge with Robert Vance beside him, and neither of them said anything immediately when Naomi emerged, which was the right choice because it allowed her to see them first and understand, before words were required, what she was looking at. Two men who had gotten on planes in the middle of the night because they had read her email and understood what it contained. "Dr. Carter," Sir Edmund said. He stepped forward. He did not extend his hand right away. He looked at her first directly with the particular gravity of someone who is about to say something they mean. "I am Edmund Hale. I want to say before anything else, before any discussion of business or contract or certification, I am sorry. What happened to you last night at my airline's gate was wrong. It was an injustice. And I am personally sorry that it happened, and personally sorry that the conditions allowing it to happen were not corrected before they produced this outcome." It was not a corporate apology. It did not contain the phrase, "on behalf of." It did not hedge or distribute the accountability into the passive voice. Naomi received it in silence for a moment, and then she nodded, not forgiving, not dismissing, but acknowledging that it had been heard. "Robert," she said. "Naomi." His voice was strained in the way of someone who has spent a night on a transatlantic flight feeling terrible about something they contributed to. "I got both parts of the email." "Good," she said. "Then let's talk." The room they moved to was a small private meeting space off the Heathrow arrivals concourse, the kind of space that exists in major international airports for situations that require discretion, glass-walled on one side to maintain the sense of the airport's public nature while providing sufficient separation from it. A tray of coffee had been arranged on the central table by someone who understood the situation. Naomi poured herself a cup without comment and sat down, and Sir Edmund and Robert sat across from her, and the meeting began in the way of meetings where everyone already understands the essential facts and is present to determine what happens next. The G88 certification, Naomi said, because she was constitutionally incapable of building to a conclusion when the conclusion was ready to be stated. The engine is sound. Better than sound, it has exceeded the performance benchmarks in 3 of the 7 primary assessment categories. You have my full written certification. Present it to your board at 2 o'clock. Sir Edmund released a breath he appeared to have been carrying since landing. That is extraordinarily good news, he said quietly. Thank you. The addendum, Naomi said, is not good news. It is necessary news, which is different. She set her coffee down. I want to walk through what I'm asking for, and I want to be direct about the fact that I am framing these as conditions of the ongoing Aerosystems partnership, not as requests that TransGlobe can assess and respond to in its own time. Sir Edmund nodded once. Robert nodded. Neither of them pushed back, which told her they had read the email thoroughly and had spent the flight hours processing what it meant. The Meridian Group, she said. Third-party audit of your entire complaint history going back 10 years, cross-referenced by employee route and passenger demographic. This is not about finding individuals to terminate. This is about understanding where the gaps are, where complaints were received and not acted upon, and why and by whom. Agreed, Sir Edmund said. We've already contacted Meridian. They can begin within the week, the station manager, Naomi said. Gloria Marsh received 6 complaints about Diane Holloway over 5 years, and closed all 6 of them without escalation. I understand why managers make those decisions. Seniority union, complexity, the path of least resistance. I am asking you to understand why that decision made 6 times produced what happened last night. What will happen with her? Robert and Sir Edmund exchanged a look. She's been placed on administrative review, Robert said. When the complaint audit is complete, her handling of those 6 reports will be part of the finding. We expect it will result in a transition. I want the complaint history itself, Naomi said. Not the outcome of the audit, the raw files. Not because I want to do anything with them. Because I want to see how many people tried to tell you something and were not heard. And I want that number to be real to me, so that what I recommend to Meridian about the training program is grounded in the actual scope of what needs to be addressed. Robert looked at her across the table, and the look he gave her had something in it she had not seen from him before. Not guilt exactly, and not pity, but the specific quality of a man who is understanding something fully for the first time that he had previously understood only partially. Naomi, he said. I didn't know this happened to you regularly. I should have asked. You didn't know because I didn't tell you, she said. I'm telling you now, and I need TransGlobe Air to build an organization where passengers who don't have my particular position or my particular phone contact receive the same response. She paused. Every one of them deserves to get on the plane they paid for. Sir Edmund nodded slowly. The training, he said. Meridian will design and run it. Every customer-facing employee. I'll be in the first cohort. Yes, Naomi said. You will. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. By the end of it, the retainer to the Meridian Group had been authorized. The complaint files had been committed to Naomi's secure inbox by TransGlobe's legal team. A formal statement of corrective action had been drafted, which Naomi reviewed and approved with 3 specific amendments. The G88 certification documents were transmitted to the board presentation team. As they stood to leave, Robert caught her eye. The board presentation at 2, he said. Sir Edmund would like you there if you're willing, to present the certification finding directly. Naomi considered this. She had not slept enough, and she had been awake and working for nearly 40 hours, and she would be presenting to a room full of executives who held $6 billion in collective attention. I'll be there, she said. I'll need 3 hours in a hotel room between now and then. Already arranged, Robert said. She picked up the Pelican case. She picked up her briefcase. She walked out of this room and into the morning arrivals of Heathrow, which moved around her with the indifferent vitality of a major airport at the start of a new day full of people going somewhere, full of people arriving, full of people who did not know and would never know that a woman in a charcoal cashmere tracksuit had somewhere over the Atlantic in the previous night written the document that would change the way 40,000 people understood their jobs. She found a coffee that was slightly better than the one in the meeting room, and she drank it standing at a window that faced the runway, watching the aircraft move, listening to the engines, and she thought, good engines. Good morning. Time to work. 18 months later, Naomi Carter was at JFK again. This was not remarkable. She was at JFK with the frequency that would have impressed a smaller person moving through the terminal with the same practiced economy of motion, the same Pelican case, the same charcoal cashmere tracksuit she had by this point owned 4 of them, because when she found something that worked, she did not see the value in introducing unnecessary variables. The gate for Trans-Globe Air Flight 88 to Frankfurt was at the far end of Terminal 7. She arrived 20 minutes before boarding, which was her standard practice, and she joined the first-class line, which was shorter than usual, and she set the Pelican case down and looked out the terminal window at the tarmac and thought about Frankfurt, about the component testing that awaited her there, about the junior engineer on her team who had sent an analysis overnight that contained the seed of something genuinely interesting. She did not think about the last time she had stood in a first-class boarding line at Terminal 7. Or rather, she thought about it the way she thought about all data points, with the awareness that it existed, and that it had been processed, and that its processing had produced outcomes which were now part of the landscape. The Meridian audit had been completed 8 months ago. Its findings, which she had read in full, all 211 pages, had contained the number she had wanted to see and had known would be significant, and the number had been significant, and it had produced the institutional response it deserved. The training program had been running for 6 months. She had been told it was working, and she had arranged to receive quarterly reports, and the quarterly reports had said what the training was supposed to produce. She had not asked about Diane Holloway. She had not needed to. A flight attendant came to the boarding podium. Young, late 20s, perhaps 30, moving with the alert, unhurried confidence of someone who liked their job and was good at it. Her name tag said Maya. Her smile as she surveyed the boarding line was the unreserved smile of someone who is genuinely glad to be here. Her eyes moved along the line with the professional attentiveness of hospitality rather than the calculating attentiveness of judgment. They reached Naomi. "Good afternoon," Maya said, extending her hand for the boarding pass with the open, direct ease of someone who has never considered doing it any other way. She scanned it. The reader beeped. The green light appeared. She looked at the screen, and her face, when she looked back up, held the specific brightness of genuine recognition, not the celebrity recognition of someone who reads industry news, but the warmer recognition of someone who has heard a story that mattered to them. Dr. Carter, Maya said, "Welcome aboard. We are so glad to have you flying with us today." It was in isolation a standard welcome. It was the kind of thing flight attendants say to passengers 100 times a day. But it was not performed, and it was not fearful, and it was not the calculated excess of someone overcompensating for something. It was direct. It was professional. It was, and this was the thing. This was the precise and particular thing, completely unremarkable. "May I take that for you?" Maya asked, glancing at the Pelican case with the confident curiosity of someone who assumes they are capable of handling it carefully. "I'll make sure it's secured in the forward compartment." Naomi looked at her. She looked at the open, steady, professional face of this young woman who had been hired after the Meridian training was already running, who had learned to do her job in an environment where the expectation of dignity was built into the structure rather than depending on the character of any individual, and who was therefore simply doing her job the way it was always supposed to be done without any particular act of moral courage required to do it. This, Naomi understood, was what she had written the addendum for. Not for the firing, not for the audit numbers, not for the apology at Heathrow, which had been necessary and had mattered. For Maya not having to be exceptional in order to be decent. For the passenger who would come after Naomi today, whoever they were, whatever they looked like, whatever they were carrying, receiving the same thing without it requiring anyone to be a hero. "Thank you," Naomi said, and she handed over the Pelican case and she walked through the gate and into the aircraft. She opened her laptop before the door had finished closing. Frankfurt was waiting. The engines were already cycling up singing their clean-engineered song, the G88S, certified safe exactly as they should be. She put her headphones in. She opened the junior engineer's analysis. It was, she decided, within 30 seconds, better than interesting. She began to work. The Meridian Group arrived at Transglobe Air with the precision and the thoroughness of a team that had been brought in to find the truth and had the institutional backing to do it. They interviewed over 400 employees across 9 hub terminals in a 6-month period. They reviewed every documented passenger complaint filed with Transglobe Air in the previous decade, a body of records that had existed in a state of careful, organized inaccessibility, not hidden exactly, but arranged in a way that made patterns difficult to see unless you were specifically looking for them, which no one inside the organization had chosen to do. The Meridian team was specifically looking for them. The report, when it arrived at Sir Edmund Hale's desk, was 211 pages. He had been told it would be difficult reading. He had agreed when he commissioned it that difficult reading was required. He read it on a Saturday morning in his London office, which was not something he had planned but which became necessary once he started and found he could not stop. The numbers were not numbers when you read the reports behind them. They were people. A woman traveling with her mother for a medical appointment, redirected from the business cabin she had paid for because the seat was needed for operational reasons that no written record supported. A man in his 50s flying to see his son graduate, questioned at the boarding gate about his first-class booking for 12 minutes, while the flight boarded around him. A professor, a surgeon, a small business owner, a grandmother. The demographic of people who had been moved and questioned and delayed and dismissed carried a pattern so clear that the only question the Meridian report needed to answer was why the pattern had persisted for as long as it had. The answer to that question implicated not Diane Holloway primarily, but the culture around her, the culture of overlooked complaints and closed files and 27 years of seniority, and the decision made repeatedly by people in positions of authority that a quiet settlement and a moved-on passenger was preferable to the institutional friction of accountability. Gloria Marsh was the most proximate example of this culture, but the audit made clear she was not its only practitioner. 43 employees with documented patterns of bias-adjacent behavior were terminated over the 3 months following the Meridian report. The union contested 7 of the terminations. It prevailed on 2 of them. The other 5 were upheld because the documentation was as it tends to be when someone is genuinely looking at it definitive. Diane Holloway was not among those 43 because she had already been removed before the audit began. Her termination was the first data point. The audit established that she had not been an outlier. The class action lawsuit filed by George Bradford and 2 other first-class passengers who had witnessed the events at Gate 23 and had, upon landing in London and reading the news coverage that had emerged from Kevin's witness statement, understood what they had seen and decided to act settled within 60 days. Transglobe did not contest it. The insurance company's subsequent action against Diane personally seeking to recoup a portion of the settlement costs was harder to defend. She had no remaining employment income. She sold her apartment in Queens. The legal costs absorbed most of what remained. Gloria Marsh accepted an early retirement package. She did not contest it. She had read the complaint files, all of them for the first time in sequence as part of the investigation process, and the experience of reading them had done something to her understanding of the previous 5 years that made the prospect of continuing in the role feel simply impossible. Kevin was retained. He was given remedial training, which he completed with a thoroughness that went beyond the requirements. His witness statement had been his union representative told him the most comprehensive and honest single document in the entire investigative record, and the representation of that honesty in the investigation's outcome was something he thought about sometimes when he was processing boarding lines at Gate 23 and wondered whether the moment he had stayed quiet and the moment he had finally spoken had made a difference. They had. Diane Holloway worked the 4 p.m. to midnight shift at the LaGuardia long-term parking facility, which was exactly the kind of work available to a 59-year-old woman with a gap in her employment record and a termination for gross misconduct at her previous employer. The booth was heated in winter and stuffy in summer, and occupied a position near the facility entrance where the ambient noise of the adjacent expressway provided a constant background that she had over 8 months stopped hearing. She had stopped hearing a lot of things. She had stopped hearing from the colleagues she had worked beside for decades, most of whom had seen the CCTV footage that Kevin's witness statement had made part of the official record, and many of whom had watched the Meridian training video that used that footage as its opening case study. She had stopped hearing from the friends who had been, she understood now, colleagues first and friends second, which was a distinction that the loss of the job had clarified without mercy. She had stopped hearing from the union, which had been clear about its position, and had not revisited it. She had not stopped hearing herself. That was, she had found the part of her new life she was least prepared for the particular loudness of her own thoughts in the long stretches of the parking shift when there were no cars to process and nothing to do but sit in the glass booth and be with herself. She had spent most of those stretches in the first several months constructing arguments. Diane Holloway had been an outstanding employee for 27 years. Diane Holloway had been betrayed by an organization that had used her and then abandoned her the moment it became convenient. Diane Holloway had been made a scapegoat for the failings of a culture she had not created. The arguments were not entirely without a version of logic, which was the thing that made them durable, and she had polished them to a smoothness that allowed them to function almost like truth if she did not look at them too directly. She was looking at them directly on the February night when Captain Ray Okafor came through the facility. She recognized him before he reached the booth, transglobe uniform, the navigator wings, the specific kind of face that accrues in a career spent in cockpits, watchful and calm. He had been a senior pilot when she was a senior purser. She had processed his boarding line in some configuration dozens of times. He slid his parking ticket under the glass. She scanned it without speaking. $14, she said. He inserted his card. The machine processed. And then as the receipt was printing, he looked at her not with the bright malice of someone who had been waiting for this moment, but with the quiet, slightly sad directness of someone who had something to say, and had decided to say it simply. "I was in the Meridian refresher last week," he said. "They still use the Gate 23 footage. They use it at the beginning before anything else. Your name is on the title slide. They call it the Holloway Protocol." Diane did not move. The receipt sat in the tray between them. Every new hire, he said. Every returning crew member doing the annual refresher. Baggage handlers, gate agents, cabin crew pilots. They all see it. He picked up the receipt, folded it, put it in his jacket pocket. They see what happened. Then they talk about why it happened, and what was really going on, and what they would do differently. It's the part of the training that people remember most. He looked at her for a moment longer, and the look was not triumphant. It was the look of a man who understood that he was looking at someone whose worst moment had been permanently installed in the institutional memory of the organization they had both spent their careers in, and who found this not satisfying but genuinely sorrowful in the way that necessary things can be sorrowful. "Good night, Diane," he said, and he took his parking ticket and walked toward the terminal shuttle. His footsteps even and receding, and then he was gone, and the booth was quiet again. Diane sat for a long time without moving. She looked at the glass in front of her, which was also a mirror in the dim interior of the booth. And in the reflection, she saw the booth and herself in it. And through the glass, the dark sky of the outer parking field, and above it, the approach path to the runways where every 4 to 6 minutes an aircraft descended through the nightlights, blinking engines precise, coming in from somewhere to land. For the first time in 8 months, she did not reconstruct the argument. She sat with what was true, and what was true was this: a boarding pass had been in a woman's hand. It had been valid. The scanner had been there. It would have taken 4 seconds. 4 seconds would have changed everything. She had not taken them, not because she had not had them, but because she had looked at Naomi Carter and seen something she had decided without evidence, and had then defended that decision past every point where it could have been walked back, because defending it had felt in each moment more important than being wrong. The badge she no longer wore was not what she had lost. What she had lost was the 27 years that had preceded the badge, the actual record of an actual career, replaced permanently in the institutional memory of an industry she had loved by 90 seconds of a Tuesday evening. 400 feet above the parking facility, a Transglobe aircraft crossed the outer marker on its final approach, its G-88 engine cycling down to landing power with the clean, steady harmonic that Naomi Carter had certified as airworthy. The sound carrying down through the cold air to the glass booth below where Diane Holloway sat, and did not go anywhere, and finally completely, irrevocably understood. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the moments when 4 seconds of basic decency could change everything, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We tell stories about justice, about dignity, and about what it costs when we fail to see each other clearly. Leave us a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We read every single one.